All right, let's jump into another deep dive. Today we're going to explore some really interesting ideas about ancient history. And, well, the nature of humanity, too.
Sounds intriguing.
Yeah, we're going to be looking at some clips from Trey Smith's YouTube video
Oh, okay.
called Fallen Angels, Rise of the Nephilim.
I've heard of that one.
It's pretty out there, honestly. Like, he makes some bold claims connecting, like, the Bible with archaeology, ancient texts, the whole thing.
Well, that's what we're here for, right? To unpack it all.
Right. So are you ready to kind of question what you thought you knew about history?
Let's do it.
Okay.
Let's dive in.
All right. So Smith, he starts right off with this fresh take on the serpent in the Garden of Eden.
Oh, yeah, I remember that.
He doesn't see it as like a regular snake.
Right.
He sees it more as this powerful, like, shining being.
That's interesting. It's definitely different from the traditional image, right?
Yeah, for sure. And to back this up, he uses the original Hebrew word from Genesis.
Okay.
Nash.
Which, like, it can mean serpent, but it can also mean divine or shining one.
Oh, wow. That's a whole other layer. So we're not talking about just a snake in the grass here.
No, not at all.
So how does he kind of connect that to a broader context?
Well, this is where he brings in the ancient Mesopotamian idols,
Okay.
particularly the ones that depict serpent goddesses,
Yeah.
like Tiamat.
Right.
And he suggests that serpent worship, this idea of like a powerful serpent being, has really deep roots.
Oh, yeah. Goes way back.
Way back.
That's a cool connection. And it seems like that kind of sets the stage for his next argument, right?
Right.
Which is human devolution.
Yeah, exactly. And this challenges the whole, like, typical progress narrative.
It really does.
Yeah.
So he's saying that humans haven't actually become, like, more advanced.
Exactly. He's saying we've devolved from a more advanced state.
Wow, that's a big claim. And he uses a few sources to back that up, doesn't he?
He does. He talks about Genesis, the Epic of Gilgamesh, and the Sumerian king list.
Okay, yeah.
All of which mention, like, this lost golden age where humans lived for, like, crazy long lifespans.
Yeah. And I remember he even used a visual comparison of a modern human skull versus a Neanderthal skull.
Oh, yeah.
That was pretty striking, actually.
Yeah.
The Neanderthal skull had, like, much more robust teeth, thicker bone structure. It really made you think about how we've changed, like, physically over time.
Yeah, definitely.
But this whole devolution thing, it raises a question for me.
What's that?
What caused the decline? Was it just like a natural thing, or did something happen, like Trey's suggesting, that messed with, like, our trajectory?
Yeah. That is the question, isn't it?
Yeah.
And that leads right into his interpretation of Genesis 6 and the whole sons of God thing.
Wait, the sons of God, the Ben Ha Elohim, right?
Then I held him. Yep.
Are we talking about angels here?
That's exactly what Smith believes. He thinks these sons of God were angels who, like, came down to earth. And they mated with human women.
Right.
And that's what created the Nephilim.
Okay, this is where it gets really interesting. But are there other sources that talk about these beings besides just the Bible?
That's what makes Smith's argument so interesting. He points out that these beings aren't just in the Bible. Like, they appear in tons of ancient texts from all over the world.
No way.
Yeah, like, think about giants in Greek mythology, titans in Roman mythology. It's a pretty widespread theme.
Wow. So it's like global.
Pretty much.
That's wild. It makes you think, like, maybe these stories have some basis in reality.
Yeah, exactly.
What about physical evidence, though? Does he actually, like, present anything concrete?
Well, he brings up some ritualistic artifacts.
Okay.
And some unusual skulls, especially ones found in South America.
Right.
And he suggests they could be evidence of the Nephilim, but I'm not totally convinced. Like, are those skulls and artifacts really proof, or could there be other explanations?
That's a good point. It's important to be, like, critical about the evidence.
Absolutely.
But even if we're, like, cautious about the physical stuff, the fact that these myths and legends are everywhere is pretty compelling. It suggests something big happened in our past.
It really does.
Something that, like, changed everything. So where does Mount Hermon fit into all this?
Oh, Mount Hermon. That's where it gets really mysterious.
Okay, I'm hooked. Tell me more.
He talks about this inscription found at a site called Pan's Cave on Mount Hermon. It mentions an oath taken by those who proceed from here, and Smith links that directly to the Book of Enoch.
Okay, hold on. The Book of Enoch.
Yes, which describes 200 fallen angels swearing an oath.
No way, on Mount Hermon.
On Mount Hermon.
That's like chills down my spine stuff.
Oh, right.
So what was this oath about? And why Mount Hermon? Like, what's so special about that place?
Well, that's where the Book of Enoch comes in. Smith basically says it's a key source to understand this whole period in history. It gives way more detail than the Bible does.
I'd love to hear more about the Book of Enoch.
Oh, it's fascinating. So according to this text, Enoch was a prophet who actually met with the fallen angels.
He met them face to face.
Yeah. He describes their descent to Earth, their interactions with humans, and get this, the forbidden knowledge they shared.
Okay, hold on. Forbidden knowledge? What are we talking about here?
That's a great question. They don't ever, specifically define it.
Yeah.
But Smith, he kind of suggests it included advanced skills, technologies, maybe even stuff we'd consider supernatural today.
Oh, wow.
It was forbidden. Humans weren't supposed to have it. And that ultimately led to, chaos and corruption.
I see. So he's arguing that this knowledge, the forbidden knowledge from the fallen angels, helped create early civilizations.
Right.
That's a huge claim.
Mm.
Does he give any specific examples of this knowledge?
Well, he points to things like the pyramids, the incredible engineering. They must have technologies we don't even know about, maybe remnants of this forbidden knowledge.
It does tie into this idea of a lost golden age, right? Like a time before things went bad, when humans had more knowledge, more abilities. But if it was so powerful, why did we lose it? What happened?
That brings us to Enoch's warning and the flood.
Okay.
The Book of Enoch talks about Enoch encountering the fallen angels.
Yeah.
And they're basically condemned, told they'll be bound and face judgment.
Right.
And then Enoch prophesies this massive flood, a deluge meant to wipe out the corruption.
So the flood wasn't just some natural disaster.
According to Smith's interpretation of Enoch, no, it was a judgment meant to get rid of all the consequences, the forbidden knowledge, like a hard reset.
Wow. And I remember this prophecy includes a special child who survives, right?
Exactly. Noah,
Right.
chosen to carry on the human lineage, rebuild after the flood. Smith talks about Noah building the ark, of course, but he really focuses on the urgency, the drama of everything.
Yeah, I can imagine the chaos and fear, the water rising.
Oh, it's intense. He describes people scrambling to get on the ark, animals everywhere, this violent water just engulfing everything.
It's a powerful image.
Yeah.
Like the sheer force of this divine judgment.
Totally. And in the middle of this chaos, the ark's being tossed around, and Noah cries out, "Lord, would you remember us?" It's a raw moment, desperation, fear, but they make it through. Noah, his family, the animals.
They survive. But what happens after the water goes down?
That's where we pick up in the next part of our deep dive. We'll explore what comes after the flood, the legacy it left behind.
This is already a lot to think about. Serpent worship, Nephilim, forbidden knowledge, the flood. It's like looking at history in a whole new way. I can't wait to hear what happens next. We'll be back in just a moment.
So welcome back to our deep dive into Trey Smith's Fallen Angels, Rise of the Nephilim. We've gone through some pretty intense stuff about serpent worship, forbidding knowledge, and this whole idea of fallen angels shaping human history.
It's a lot to take in,
Yep.
Seriously.
It really is.
What's stood out to you so far?
For me, it's this idea that all these ancient stories, the ones we usually just brush off as myths, might actually have truth in them, like hidden truths about our past.
It's almost like we're getting a peek behind the curtain at a different reality.
Exactly. And Smith is kind of pushing us to reconsider what we think we know about creation. It's a pretty big idea that these fallen angels, these sons of God, were more involved in building human civilization than we usually give them credit for.
Right. It definitely changes how you look at those old myths, doesn't it? All those stories about gods and demigods interacting with humans, they take on a whole new meaning.
For sure. What if those stories aren't just made up? What if they're echoes of what actually happened?
Imagine a world where humans and the divine were all mixed up, where beings with crazy powers walked among us.
Exactly. And Smith argues that the evidence is all around us if we know where to look.
Yeah, he points to those massive structures, the pyramids. How could they have been built without some kind of advanced technology we don't even understand?
That's his point. And he also talks about serpent imagery, how it's everywhere in ancient art and architecture. He connects that back to the serpent in the Garden of Eden. It's like this long-standing connection between humans and these serpent beings.
It's like Smith is putting together this huge puzzle, and every piece shows us a little bit more of this hidden past.
I like that analogy.
But it raises a question. If humans used to have all this advanced knowledge, this connection to the divine, why don't we have it now? What happened?
Well, that takes us back to the flood, which Smith sees as this, deliberate cleansing. A judgment meant to wipe out the corruption that came from, well, the fallen angels and everything they did.
So it wasn't just a natural disaster, it was a reset button.
Yeah, that's how Smith interprets it. He's saying that the flood changed everything. It cut us off from that ancient knowledge, and that's when human lifespans started getting shorter too.
Whoa, so are we just, like, living in the shadow of this lost golden age, trying to get back what we lost?
It's an interesting thought, right? And I think it ties into why people are so fascinated with ancient mysteries, hidden knowledge, anything beyond just the everyday world.
It's like we're drawn to these old stories, like they have clues about where we came from,
Yeah.
our place in the universe.
Exactly. And Smith's encouraging us to follow that pull, to dig into these myths and legends and consider that they might be more true than we realize.
But if we accept that, if we say, okay, maybe there's something to these stories, it makes you wonder about, like, the nature of reality. I mean, are there supernatural forces still around today?
Right, like unseen dimensions.
Yeah, exactly. Are we just starting to catch glimpses of something bigger?
It's a question humans have been asking forever. And while Smith doesn't give us all the answers, he definitely pushes us to be open to those possibilities.
It's both, like, exciting and kind of scary, isn't it?
Okay.
Stepping into the unknown.
Yeah.
So what about the aftermath of the flood? What happened to everyone after that big reset?
Well, we see the rainbow,
Oh, of course.
It becomes this symbol of God's promise that he won't destroy the world with a flood again.
That's a powerful image, like hope and a fresh start. But what about the people? How'd they rebuild?
Well, Noah's sons, their lineage plays out. And eventually, Shem's line leads to Abraham, and then God makes that covenant with him.
Ah, right. The covenant.
Which becomes the basis for, like, the whole Israelite faith. It has a huge impact on Western religion.
So even after the flood, those earlier events, like messing with the fallen angels, it still affects human history, even today.
For sure. And Smith, he points out this parallel between the 7 holy ones on the ark and the 7 dark ones created by Utu.
Utu, who that?
He's from Mesopotamian mythology.
Okay.
But this, like, duality of 7s, it highlights this battle between good and evil that's woven through all these ancient stories.
It's like the flood didn't wipe out those darker forces completely. That fight between good and evil, it just keeps going.
Exactly. And that brings us to Smith's overall message about how these events from so long ago still matter to us now.
I'm curious to hear more about that.
He's basically saying that the battle between good and evil, light and darkness, it's happening all around us, even now. And we all play a part in it, whether we realize it or not.
So it's not just ancient history. It's about understanding the forces that are shaping us right now.
Right. He wants us to see that there's more to life than what we see on the surface, to reconnect with, like, our spiritual side, to search for truth and pick the side of light over darkness.
It's a pretty empowering message, actually. Like, we have the power to choose, to make a difference, to fight for what's good.
I agree.
But it's hard, isn't it? Like, how do we actually deal with these ideas? How do we know what's real and what's not in these ancient accounts?
It's a great question, and it's something we'll talk about in the last part of our deep dive. We'll look at some of the challenges with Smith's work and offer some thoughts on how to approach these ancient mysteries thoughtfully and carefully.
This is a lot to process, but I have to say it's really fascinating. Like,
Yeah.
a whole new world has opened up. I can't wait to hear more. We'll be back in just a moment to wrap up our deep dive into Trey Smith's Fallen Angels, Rise of the Nephilim. Don't go anywhere.
Okay, so we're back for the final part of our deep dive into Trey Smith's Fallen Angels, Rise of the Nephilim, and wow, we have really gone deep. Serpent worship, forbidden knowledge, these fallen angels may be shaping human history. It's a lot.
Yeah, it's a huge story, right?
Yeah.
Smith, he takes all these ancient texts like Genesis and the Book of Enoch, mixes in archaeology, modern science even, and creates this whole picture of a hidden history, knowledge that's been lost, forgotten.
And he doesn't stop there. It's not just about the past, it's about now, about our future too. That whole battle between good and evil. Like, we have to choose the side of light. I think that's a big part of why people are so drawn to Smith's work, It speaks to this need for meaning, for something beyond just the material world.
Yeah, it gives you a way to understand good and evil. Makes you feel like you can actually make a difference, even when the world feels kind of crazy.
Exactly. But, not everyone agrees with Smith's interpretation. He's gotten some criticism for mixing the Bible with other sources and for presenting his ideas as facts instead of just interpretations.
Right. And it's important to remember that, to be critical.
Definitely. Whenever we're looking at ancient texts, historical events, we need to think for ourselves. Where's the evidence? Could there be other explanations? What are the biases?
So how do we do that? How do we approach these mysteries, these ancient stories, with like an open mind, but also a healthy dose of skepticism?
I think it starts with understanding that history is always changing, you know? We're always finding new things, new interpretations. We got to be open to new information, ready to maybe change our minds when we learn something new.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
But it's not always easy, is it? It's so easy to get swept up in a good story, especially if it fits with what we already believe, what we want to believe.
Totally. And that's why we need discernment. To be able to look at information, analyze it, figure out what's real and what's just speculation.
We have to ask ourselves, okay, what's the proof? Could there be other explanations?
Exactly.
And it's good to remember there's rarely one right answer with these ancient mysteries.
Oh, for sure. Different people will look at the same evidence and see totally different things.
And that's okay. That's what makes it interesting. Having different viewpoints, it helps us understand things better.
I agree.
So, as we finish up our deep dive into Trey Smith's Fallen Angels, Rise of the Nephilim, what would you say are the most important things for our listeners to take away?
I think the biggest thing is to be curious, to ask questions, to explore. Don't be afraid to dive into these mysteries, but do it with a critical mind. Look at the evidence, weigh different perspectives, and then come to your own conclusions.
It's about the journey too, right?
Absolutely.
Not just the answer. The process of researching, questioning, having these conversations, that's where we learn and grow.
Couldn't have said it better myself. So, whether you agree with Smith or not, keep looking into these topics, keep asking questions, keep learning, and keep diving deep into those mysteries of the past and the possibilities of what's to come.
Absolutely. Well said. Thanks for joining us on this wild ride into the world of fallen angels, ancient history, and all those stories that never seem to get old. We hope it sparked your curiosity, inspired you to keep exploring. Until next time, keep searching, keep questioning, and keep diving deep.